The most terrifying sound on the Eastern Front of World War II was silence. It is 2 a.m. The temperature is 40 degrees below zero. The German 6th Army is trying to sleep, but they can't. They are waiting. They came from the darkness. They had no radar. They had no radios. They had no parachutes. And if you were a German soldier, you were told one simple fact. If you shoot one down, you get the Iron Cross. Why? Because these weren't just pilots. These were the night witches. And they were the only thing the Luftwaffe feared more than death itself. To understand how a group of teenage girls ended up flying suicide missions in crop dusters, we have to go back to the summer of 1941. Operation Barbarossa. The Nazi war machine was tearing through the Soviet Union. The Red Air Force had been decimated. In the first week alone, the Soviets lost 2,000 aircraft. Most were destroyed before they even got off the ground. The Germans weren't just winning. They were erasing Russia from the map. Desperation wasn't a mood, it was a way of life. The Soviet Union needed bodies, they needed pilots, they needed a miracle. And that miracle walked into the Kremlin wearing a skirt and a Hero of the Soviet Union medal. Meet Marina Raskova. In America, they had Amelia Earhart. In Russia, they had Marina. She was a celebrity, a record-breaking navigator, and the first woman to earn the Gold Star Medal. Raskova's office was flooded with thousands of letters, not fan mail, but pleas. Letters from young women, factory workers, students, farmers, begging to be sent to the front lines. They wrote, "Can I not hold a rifle? Can I not fly a plane? Why must I watch my country burn?" Raskova knew something the generals didn't. She knew that in a war of annihilation, gender is a luxury you can't afford. So she did the impossible. She went to Joseph Stalin. The Soviet military banned women from combat. It was the law. But Raskova used her personal connection with Stalin to make a radical pitch. "Give me the women. I will give you 3 regiments of the world's first all-female Air Force." On October 8, 1941, Order 0099 was signed. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment was born. But these women weren't given the warm welcome Raskova expected. The male pilots called them the Ladies' Club. They laughed, they jeered. One general reportedly said, "Is it not enough that our men are dying? Now we must send our little girls to burn?" But the real insult wasn't the words. It was the equipment. This is what the Germans were flying. The Messerschmitt Bf 109. All metal. Top speed 400 miles per hour. Cannon fire that could rip a tank apart. And this is what the women of the 588th were given. The Polikarpov Po-2. It was a training plane. A crop duster. It was designed in 1928. It wasn't made of reinforced aluminum. It was made of plywood and canvas. Think about that. Plywood. If you poked it hard enough with a screwdriver, you'd go right through. It had an open cockpit, meaning there was no glass between the pilot and the freezing Russian air. It had no radio. How did they communicate? They waved at each other. It had no radar. How did they navigate? Stopwatches and maps drawn on their knees. It had no guns. Well, the navigator had a pistol, but good luck shooting down a fighter jet with a handgun. But the most terrifying omission? Parachutes. The planes were so weak that the weight of a parachute was considered too heavy. If the plane caught fire, you didn't jump, you burned. And these planes burned fast. They were nicknamed Russfahner by the Germans, plywood Russ, or more grimly, coffins with wings. But here is the twist that the Germans never saw coming. The Po-2 was a terrible warplane, but its weakness was its greatest strength. Its maximum speed was 90 miles per hour. That is slower than most cars on a highway today. The stall speed of a German Messerschmitt, the speed below which it would fall out of the sky, was higher than the maximum speed of the Po-2. Do you see the irony? The German planes were too fast to kill them. If a German pilot tried to slow down enough to aim at a witch, his own plane would stall and crash. The night witches were hiding in the physics of flight itself. October 1941, Engels Aviation School. Hundreds of young women arrived. Some are teachers, some are students, some are teenagers who lied about their age. They expected to be trained. They didn't expect to be transformed. The first thing to go was the hair. Long braids, the pride of Russian femininity, were sheared off. "You are soldiers now," Raskova told them. "Forget your lipstick, forget your dances. You are here to kill Nazis." The military had no uniforms for women. They were given men's hand-me-downs, tunic sizes that could fit two of them, boots so large they had to stuff them with rags and newspaper just to keep them from falling off. They looked ridiculous, but they didn't act it. Raskova condensed a 3-year intensive training course into just a few months. They trained 14 hours a day. Mechanics, navigation, bombing theory, night flying. The mechanics worked in sub-zero temperatures. If you touched the cold metal of the engine with your bare hand, your skin would rip right off. So they worked quickly. They slept in dugouts. They ate watery soup. Among them was Nadezhda Popova, 19 years old. Before the war, she was a flight instructor who dreamed of flying gliders. Now, she was learning how to drop death from the sky. But the training wasn't just about learning to fly. It was about learning to see in the dark. Remember, no radar. These women had to navigate by landmarks, a bend in the river, a burning church, the flash of artillery. They became creatures of the night. By May 1942, they were ready. The 588th Regiment was deployed to the front. The men laughed as the crop dusters arrived. The male commanders rolled their eyes. "Don't worry, you girls can do the laundry while we fight the war." He wouldn't be laughing for long, because the 588th wasn't there to do laundry. They were there to introduce the German army to a new kind of nightmare. A nightmare that began the moment the sun went down. But how do you use a crop duster to destroy a tank division? How do you fly through a wall of anti-aircraft fire in a plane made of fabric? The answer lay in a tactic so dangerous, so insane, that it earned them their legendary name. And that tactic started with turning the engine off. The strategy was born out of necessity. The PO-2 carried only 2 bombs. That's it, 2. To have any impact, they couldn't just drop them anywhere. They had to be precise. They had to be invisible. Here is the maneuver that made them famous. Step 1. Climb to a high altitude before reaching the target. Step 2. Cut the engine. Step 3. Glide. Like a predator stalking its prey, the plane would drift silently through the night sky. No engine noise to alert the anti-aircraft guns, no heat signature. Just a ghost made of wood and canvas falling towards the earth. The only warning the Germans got was the sound of the wind made as it rushed over the canvas wings and the bracing wires. Swish, swish. To the terrified soldiers on the ground, it didn't sound like a plane. It sounded like a witch's broomstick sweeping the sky. Hence the name, Die Nachthexen, the night witches. By the time the engine roared back to life, the bombs were already whistling down. Boom, boom, target destroyed. But the mission wasn't over. This was just the beginning of the psychological torture. We found diaries of German soldiers from the Eastern Front. They didn't just complain about the bombs, they complained about the sleep. The witches didn't come once a night, they came every 3 minutes, wave after wave, all night long, from sunset to sunrise. The physical damage was small compared to heavy bombers, but the psychological damage? It was catastrophic. The Germans couldn't sleep, they couldn't rest, they couldn't light a fire to keep warm. They were freezing, exhausted, and paranoid. They started seeing witches in every shadow. As one German veteran later admitted, we simply couldn't believe that the pilots causing us such hell were women. But let's talk about the endurance required to do this. The Poland II could only carry 2 bombs. To make a difference, they had to fly multiple sorties. Not 2, not 5. Nadezhda Popova once flew 18 missions in a single night. 18 times. Imagine the physical toll. The cockpit was open. The temperature was minus 30 degrees. The wind bit into their faces, freezing their skin. When they landed, they didn't get coffee. They got 3 minutes. The ground crew, also women, would rush out. They would manually lift 100-kilogram bombs and strap them under the wings. There were no machines to help, just muscle and willpower. In one night, a crew of 2 petite women could lift and load over 3 tons of explosives. Nadezhda Popova recalled that sometimes she was so exhausted she couldn't move her legs to climb out of the cockpit. Her friends had to carry her. But she didn't stop. Why? Because she had seen what the Nazis did to her village. Popova wasn't fighting for glory. She was fighting for vengeance. She said later, "I saw the smiling faces of the Nazi pilots as they strafed our children, and I swore I would wipe that smile off their faces." Of course, the Germans adapted. They developed a defense specifically for the witches. They called it the circus. It worked like this. Searchlights would scan the sky. Once one light caught a plane, dozens more would lock onto it. The pilot would be blinded. The cockpit would light up like the inside of the sun. And then the flat guns would open fire. Being caught in the circus was usually a death sentence. The PO2 was slow. It couldn't outrun the bullets. But remember, they flew in pairs. They used themselves as bait. One pilot would deliberately fly into the searchlights to draw the fire. She would dance with death, twisting and turning to keep the Germans distracted. While the guns were focused on her, the second plane would glide in from the dark. Silence. Swish. Boom. They destroyed the lights that hunted them. It was a game of cat and mouse, played every single night. But sometimes, the cat won. We mentioned earlier that they had no parachutes. Now understand what that truly means. In modern warfare, if a pilot is hit, they eject. They have a chance. For the Night Witches, a hit fuel tank meant one of 2 things. You could either burn to death in the cockpit, or you could jump without a chute. Most chose to stay and try to land. Most didn't make it. One night, the Germans brought in a specialized night fighter ace. He had a new Messerschmitt with radar. In a single night, he shot down 4 witches, 4 planes, 8 women. The survivors found the wreckage the next day. There were no bodies to bury. The fire had taken everything. They didn't cry. They didn't mourn. Not yet. They went back to the airfield. They loaded the bombs, and they went back up. "My dear mother," one pilot wrote, "don't cry for me. I am not afraid to die. I am only afraid that I won't be able to do enough before I go." They flew over 30,000 missions in total. They dropped 23,000 tons of bombs. 23,000 tons, delivered by hand. by teenagers in planes made of wood. But the war didn't last forever. Berlin eventually fell, and when the smoke cleared, these women expected to be hailed as heroes. They expected parades. They expected respect. Instead, they were erased. Why was the regiment disbanded so quickly? Why were they excluded from the massive Victory Day parade in Moscow? The reason is almost as tragic as the war itself. The war was over. The fascist beast had been slain. Moscow threw the biggest party in human history, the Victory Day Parade of 1945. You see the heavy tanks, you see the artillery regiments, you see the fighter aces walking with their chests full of medals. But look closely. There is something missing. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment, the Night Witches, they were not there. Despite being the most decorated female unit in the Soviet Air Force, despite dropping 23,000 tons of bombs, despite striking terror into the heart of the Luftwaffe, they were told to stay home. The official reason? It was insulting. The Soviet command decided that their planes, the slow plywood crop dusters, were too slow for the parade. They would slow down the magnificent display of modern Soviet power. And the women? They were told their marching was not soldierly enough. Their boots were too big. Their uniforms didn't fit right. Imagine that. You fly through hellfire for 3 years. You watch your friends burn alive. You save your country. And then you were told, sorry, you don't look cool enough for the cameras. Within months of the war ending, the regiment was disbanded. The women were sent home. They were told to go back to being teachers, factory workers, and mothers. The Soviet Union wanted to project strength, and in their eyes, grandmothers in plywood planes didn't look like strength.
So they did just that. They went home. For decades, nobody knew who they were. You could be sitting in a math class in Moscow in 1955, listening to a strict, middle-aged woman teach you algebra. You would have no idea that the hand holding the chalk had once dropped bombs on Nazi tanks. They didn't brag. They didn't write books. They kept their medals in drawers, hidden under socks and linens. Why? Because they fought for survival, not for fame. But they never forgot each other. Every year on Victory Day, they would meet in a park in Moscow, not as soldiers, but as sisters. They would drink vodka, they would sing the old songs, and they would remember the witches who didn't come home.
Today, history has finally caught up with them. We look back at the Night Witches not just as a curiosity of war, but as a lesson in pure human will. They proved that technology doesn't win wars. Spirit does. The Germans had the jets. They had the radar. They had the engineering. But they didn't have these women. Nadezhda Popova, who flew 852 missions, lived to be 91 years old. Before she died, she was asked if she was ever afraid. She smiled and said, "In the sky, there is no time for fear. There is only the mission, and the sister flying beside you." They were the Night Witches, the silent death, the wooden ghosts. And they remind us that sometimes the most terrifying force on earth is a teenage girl protecting her home.
The Night Witches were erased from the Victory Parade, but we won't let them be erased from history. I want to ask you a question. If you were given a plane made of plywood and told to fly against the Luftwaffe with no parachute, would you get in the cockpit? Type yes or no in the comments below. I want to see how many brave souls we have in this community.
We are working on a documentary about the Ghost Army, the American artists who used inflatable tanks to fool Hitler. It's a story you won't believe. If you don't want to miss that, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell right now. This channel is dedicated to the stories they didn't teach you in school. I'll see you in the next one. Keep looking up.